So today we're going to talk a little bit about where stand-up comedy is right now and kind of where I'd like to see it go next. So, in the early 2000s, stand-up comedy was kind of in a weird place. Seinfeld was off the air, podcasts weren't really a thing yet, and The Burst a decade earlier was still kind of reverberating through the comedy scene. So following the oversaturation and inevitable burst of the 1980s comedy boom, the industry was justifiably splintered into factions, right? Over 25% of the comedy clubs that opened in the 80s closed in the 90s. Alternative comedy had been gaining traction in kind of the hip downtown parts of Los Angeles and San Francisco and New York. But comedy hadn't been cool in over a decade. The hipsters had kind of been doing their damnedest to separate themselves from that kind of cheesy 80s brick wall, observational, banal style of comedy.
Hey, ladies and jellyfish.
That, frankly, had done more than its fair share of the driving into the ground of my precious art form. And beyond the comedy world, even as a country, we were kind of in a weird place, still feeling the reverberations of 9/11, freshly into two wars we only peripherally understood. In terms of what people needed from comedy, that quirky alternative scene wasn't gonna scratch that itch, it wasn't gonna cut it. Dane Cook and his wave of bro comedy was kind of cresting, and it was clear that scene wasn't really cutting it either.
Me. Ah!
Enter Louis C.K., right? Louis was rude and crass and incredibly vulnerable, and hate him, he still found a way to tap into this kind of countrywide feeling of suppressed anxiety that was in desperate need of being exercised. And the irony isn't lost on me that the kind of relentless exercising of emotions, let's call them, is kind of what led to his downfall a few months ago. Anyway, so look at that. In the same way that movies like Jason Bourne took over and we got these like gritty superhero movies and gritty James Bond movies and tones shifted, Louis ushered in this kind of gritty, guilty, hyper-vulnerable, angsty comedy. And that's the comedy that we've kind of seen purveying everything since the beginning of this Louis era. Now, however, it's a different time. It's 2018. Donald Trump is president. The world is falling apart. All of these things are happening. And, the world feels more and more like an Onion article every day. And Louis C.K., the guy who started the biggest and most successful comedy wave since the 80s, is now on a thankfully ever-growing list of men that are persona non grata in Hollywood because of disgusting predatorial behavior. Now, that's probably not what's gonna make us laugh now, is it? The world is different. Humor changes and evolves depending on what society needs. There are times when we need the people who are saying the shit that we feel like we can't say. And then there are times when people distracting us from the shit is really what we need. And it kind of oscillates back and forth between those. If you look back over the decades, it's a pretty clear pattern. We're not going to be as wowed by that right now. We're tired, We don't want to listen to comedians from the school of Louis C.K. telling us how much they hate themselves. We really don't need someone to verbalize our fear. There is enough fear verbalization coming at us from all sides right now. If you ask me, we need wordplay and silliness and some goddamn levity. A few months ago, Jason Zinoman, who I adore, wrote a New York Times article entitled "Comedy is Booming, I Can't Wait for the Bust." And, I agree with him. Some things got to give. And there's really probably a good chance we're headed towards another bust, just like in the 80s and 90s. And yes, I see that coming, and I see how that would be a good thing. You know, when your art form's not in vogue, it means that there's room for weirder things to grow, which I always love to watch. You know, if nothing else, it would be fun to watch comedy rebuild itself and see all those weird things that will have a chance to sneak into the spotlight. But I'm still holding on hope that instead of busting, we'll have someone, probably one person, maybe a movement, sweep in and kind of usher us into a new era all their own. You know, start a new trend, just like Louis did, just like Steve Martin did 40 years ago, just like all of these amazing comedians have been able to do. And I think it's pretty clear that I want someone, and that I think a lot of us want someone who's going to save us from this downward slide and kind of remind us how to laugh at dumb things again. You know, take comic book movies, for example. They've been gritty and exhausting and beautiful. You know, The Dark Knight is one of the best comic movies ever made. You can't argue that. But what came out 6 months ago and was like incredibly amazing? Ragnarok. It's a comedy. Like, I think we're coming back here because we're tired. So let's talk about what we do now, right? I don't pretend to have much pull on the comedy tides at large, but that doesn't mean I don't have my top draft picks for who I would love to see be the bearer of this future possible era. There are plenty of underrated, brilliant comedians worthy of much more attention than they're currently receiving. I've worked in like 3 different comedy clubs, and I would see these amazing people whose names no one knew, who are incredible. However, keeping in mind the needs of right now, there are a few who I think are particularly well suited for the task at hand. So in no particular order, I'm going to be presenting some of my Katie Mears top draft picks for who I would like to see kind of take over next. It's very exciting, and you'll see those videos coming up in the next few weeks. And I encourage you to check these people out and let them take you into their weird worlds, because they're doing truly incredible things, and I think that they could save us. I really do. Okay, that's all for now. Like, subscribe, all that bull I hate saying. And yeah, I'm excited to be back. I'm about to graduate and things like that, so I'm looking forward to making more videos. Bye.